Exactly what kind of work do you do for physicians?
Well, it's been said that healthcare law is a mile wide and an inch deep. That is to say, it really covers a myriad of legal issues. But I think I can make three groupings of the type of work that I do. The first is the representation of individual physicians, often ones who have just completed a residency or a fellowship, in their initial employment agreements with either a private group, an academic group, or hospital-sponsored practice. So that's one relatively large category. And by the way, it also applies to physicians who perhaps have been in practice but are just changing employers. The second category is the representation of the legal entity which is operating a medical group. So in that role, I'm representing the group. And it's much the same as any business entity representation. It's just happens to be a medical group. Third category is the representation of individual physicians who have issues or proceedings before a hospital medical staff or a licensure board. So I know you'll want to know more about each of those categories, but those are the three main categories of representation.
Let's focus on your work with physicians and their employment agreements. What does that involve?
Well, employment agreements are often written agreements, and they cover the entire employment relationship between the physician and the employer. So when I review these, and I've reviewed literally hundreds, I'm looking for the who, what, when, where, why, how, and how much of the elements of the contract, how it, what the physician's duties are, what their hours, the practice locations, what is the compensation plan, what's the guaranteed salary, is there an incentive compensation plan. I'm looking also at other benefits that are important to physicians, like the employer's coverage of their CME expenses and dues and subscriptions, licenses. These kinds of things are often expensive. We look carefully at professional liability or malpractice insurance, and we're looking there particularly at what happens when the employment is terminated. Must the physician purchase at his or her own expense a tail policy? I'm looking at on-call coverage and responsibilities. That's often an important aspect of the employment arrangement. So basically, I'm reviewing the agreement, I'm abstracting it in a form that's easy to deal with and understand, and I go over that with the physician, and then we make a plan about how to proceed from that point.
Is reviewing a physician employment agreement expensive for the client?
Well, it kind of depends on when it's reviewed. If it's reviewed in advance of employment and we have a chance to address some issues that we know may be critical at some point in time, it will be much less expensive than when there's an issue in an agreement that the physician has not had carefully reviewed before. They may not understand their responsibilities, and all of a sudden the consequences of the issue are often expensive. I kind of like to think about the physicians who often come to see me for those reviews. Most of them have automobiles. Maybe it's worth $20,000, $30,000, maybe even less. And they secure insurance for their automobile, for that asset. And the cost for reviewing a physician agreement is going to be much less than that, and yet its value should be greater because it's protecting the career of that physician in their work and in their livelihood. So we're really very transparent and very forthcoming with a potential client to let them know what they can expect, and also importantly that the physician is always in control of what work gets undertaken. So I think over the years, with hundreds of these reviewed, there have been very few surprises or unpleasant experiences about what the fees are. But it's certainly fair game for the physician to ask questions, and we welcome those.
You said you represented medical groups. What does this entail?
Yeah, so a medical group is usually like a business client. They have employees, they have leases, they purchase equipment, they contract with vendors. In the case of a medical group, maybe it's an EMR contract, maybe it's some sort of consulting contract. They're billing and collection activities. They are recruiting physicians. They are making other arrangements for the provision of services. There are a lot of federal and state laws and regulations that apply to medical groups. And so, in addition to the garden variety business issues for a medical group client, we have those that are unique because healthcare is such a highly regulated industry.
You mentioned working with physicians in medical staff and licensure proceedings. Exactly what does this involve?
Well, many, if not most, physicians are members of a hospital medical staff. And there's a governance structure to that medical staff, and privileges are necessary for the physician to practice in that hospital. Our typical client in this area has had some sort of infraction against a medical staff review. Maybe they've had bad outcomes. Perhaps they have some discipline problems, and the medical staff organization initiates some sort of proceeding that may ultimately result in an adverse order, some action on their privileges, maybe revocation, suspension, restrictions in practice. And so we hope to always get involved early on in this type of representation, and our goal, of course, is to preserve maximum privileges. In the case of a board of medical examiners or a medical licensure commission, of course all physicians are licensed, and they have to maintain that license as a condition of practice. And we have clients who are before the medical board for unprofessional conduct. Perhaps there's some criminal offense. There might be a sexual boundary issue with patients. There could be breach of confidentiality, patient confidentiality, or some infraction which is subject to prosecution, and the same type of actions on a license, either a suspension or a censure, or hopefully not, but it could be the proceeding could result in a revocation of a physician's license and their ability to practice medicine in that state.
What do you enjoy most about your work with physicians?
Well, physicians are intelligent. Most of them are very hard-working. They're conscientious. They have an enormous amount of responsibility. They have an enormous training commitment to get to the point where they can practice. And yet, in most of their training, there's very little education about the kind of practical things that physicians experience in their life cycle. So I consider myself a bit of a tour guide, a protector, an advocate for physicians, and it's very satisfying work.
Well, thank you, William.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Ask Wallace Jordan series. For more information about our firm or services, please contact us at 205-870-0555 or by email at webadmin@wallacejordan.com. No representation is made that the quality of the legal services to be performed is greater than the quality of legal services performed by other lawyers.